Welcome back to my 20-year project, which is a 1996 GMC Sonoma with an LS6 engine, T56 transmission, and is sitting on air ride suspension. In the previous clip, you saw me cutting, which will be the theme for this episode because I need to make room for the new frame rails. I do a bit of fabrication, and later on in the video, I do run into a bit of a snag. Anyway, let's get started. I hope you enjoy. I want to make sure that the frame is properly braced. While I have some angle iron now holding it, I figure more is better than having not enough. So I start off with cutting some lengths of angle iron and go on to clean it up so it will have a better weld, and then I weld it onto the frame. Now it's time to disconnect the axle from the frame. I first take everything apart except for one upper forelink and one lower forelink bar. Then I bring in the engine hoist to support the axle and use it to gently set it down on jack stands. With the axle on jack stands, I can now remove the remaining forelink bars. Now with the rear end disconnected from the frame, my next step is to actually start cutting away this old frame to get ready for the new frame. It is heavy, 3x3 1/4-inch steel, and I might have some help, but I might not. I think I will have to get some help when I'm cutting away some of the bigger pieces, but I also want to set it up so nobody hurts their back as I'm starting to take it away. So what I have planned here is I have a couple of metal sawhorses that I'm thinking I'm going to tie the back to it using straps. So I have other ones of these. That way the back will be held on, and I'm thinking about cutting starting here. So that would take this hump and the back part completely off, and I can move that to the side, and if I need to cut it smaller I can afterwards. After that, I haven't figured out what my next step will be because everything to the mounts all the way up to some of these cross members that I have here temporarily is going to have to go. So again, first step is let's remove kind of this big piece, so give a lot of room to even work on the rear end, because I'm going to be changing the mounts here too, so I'm going to have to cut away these mounts. So I think it's going to be take this back piece off, probably from here back, and then I could put some attention onto the rear end, removing any of the forelink brackets I don't need anymore. And then I'll take a step back and see what my next step is. So I secured the back using the straps and the metal sawhorses, and as I was thinking through how I'm going to cut the front, I drew up here where I think is actually going to make it a little bit safer. So as you can see, is I'll cut along the top, but along the sides, because it's on this angle, well, angle compared to the frame rail itself, this will drop down a little bit because of the gap of the cut, but it's going to still be supported by this bottom piece, versus if I had cut it, say, this way, and it just drops down onto the ground. So it's still supported. So my hope is it'll move a little bit, but still be supported after I make the final cuts, and I'll probably do the outside cuts last. So I'll do over the top, inside, bottom, and I'll leave the outside on both sides of the truck till the end. Probably do the farther side where I have a little bit less room, and then do this one last so I'm well out of any harm's way if something were to kind of shift more than 3 inches one way or the other. Using a plasma cutter makes quick work of the 1/4-inch steel. but it does throw a lot of danger balls. That didn't feel too good. With the frame cut away, here's the engine hoist to confirm that we are free. Now that I've removed the rear frame, I still have to take off and remove this area because I'm going to be replacing it more forward than you see on the camera, but this area will be all rebuilt as well. One thing that's concerning me, and I've been thinking over the last few weeks how I'm going to do it, is making sure that this is located. Now this is the front bed mount on the passenger side. Over here is the driver's side. I've been using this as a datum point, a point to take my measurements from as it relates to the placement of the axle, the rear axle. And it's also going to give me placement of the bed because relative to this point forward will give me the distance between the bed and the cab. This here is where the bolt for the bed comes through, and in the center here to the center of the axis of the axle is 32 3/8. So I need to preserve this point back, but I also have to make sure that this point is square to that point. And I don't know if this is square, to be totally honest, and even here it's a little wonky when I look at it. So I think the next thing I'm going to do to ease my mind is I've been planning on replacing this piece anyways. So, and I know there's a bit of a distance between this mount and the bed. I had to do a shim last time I had the bed on. So I'm gonna make another piece that's going to sit on top of that and have it located and square to here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to build both sides, make sure they are square to each other by having a 1x1 square tubing across, and make sure everything's square there. I am then going to mount it here. Now I have a laser level here with a mark on this cross member. So the distance between here and the center hole will be preserved, and that will be the same distance back. Make sure that when I put the bar with the new mounts on, that is square with this frame. Then I can tack that in, maybe even mount it and back to the frame table. That way I know that it's square, and when I cut away all this area here, I'm not going to affect the location. Then I can use that location to figure out where the new frame rails are going to go, because I marked off the center of the driveline or the axle on the new frame rails. So that'll also give me a way to locate the frame rails when I put them in to make sure that they're all squared. So next up is I will work on making up these new mounts. I will have to get some metal to get that square tubing to go across, and then I'll make sure that everything's squared up. So I went ahead and measured the existing front bed mount to give me a baseline for my new design. I then used Fusion 360 to model it out and printed it out here on a 1:1 scale. That way I can cut this out and transfer the design to this 1-inch plate that I have. This is what I've done. I cut out the templates and marked the outside of the templates and the center line, and went ahead and used the center punch to mark out the center of the arcs. Now it's not a circle, it's an oval, so that's why there's 2 marks per hole. I then cut out the oval holes, put the template back on and mark those out, and made sure I also included the center line there. So I'll just actually extend the center line across the whole piece of both of them, because that's what I'm going to use to make sure with the temporary cross member that they are centered to each other. So you saw me rough cut the shape, and then I fine-tuned it using the flap wheel, and then I combined, or I clamped both pieces together so that I can make sure that the shape is symmetric between the two. So the next step is to start to drill out the holes and grind the oval shape out of them. My next step is to drill out the holes here to make the oval holes. And I'm looking to do a 5/8, basically two 5/8 inch holes that are close to each other. I don't have a 5/8 drill. The maximum size that I have is 1/2 inch. And once you start drilling two holes next to each other that are this close, the drill is just going to go towards the other hole. So my plan here is drill out a 1/2 inch hole. I'm going to step it up. So have a pilot hole go through, probably go 3/8, 7/16, then 1/2 inch. And then once I've done that, then I'll take some sort of grinder or Dremel to open it up to make the oval hole. Now I'm going to go up to 3/8. And I got to slow down the speed because I'm going with a bigger drill. That wasn't fun. Let's try this again. Move up to 7/16. That went a lot smoother. The other drill bit, the 3/8, was definitely not true. This is 7/16 a lot better, so I'm gonna have to replace that drill bit for sure because I was getting a little worried there. Now these holes are definitely off center. Except for this one here. So I gotta be careful of that. Probably when it was wobbling a bit, it threw it off and now it's just following it. But luckily I'm not gonna be able to get it to the right size. I'm gonna have to use some sort of Dremel to clear it out anyway. So let's get up to the 1/2 inch. I think, yeah, I should still be good. I'll be right on the edge there. And let's go 1 speed slower. Yeah, this one's right on the line there. That's okay. Okay, I'm going to take off these raised parts and then figure out a way to grind out the oval holes. To make these oval holes, what I'm planning on doing is, I remembered afterwards that I actually have a step drill. It does go up all the way to, what's that, 3/4. So there is an area for 5/8. So I'm gonna drill them out to 5/8. I'm just gonna use a hand drill. I'm not gonna use the drill press. And then I have, it's a SE5 burring tool, which is smaller than 5/8. So once I have the hole drilled out to 5/8, then I can use this and basically hog out the oval hole. Now, I'm not going to lie, that was a bit of a pain. While the burring tool was effective, I at first used an air die grinder and there just was not enough power to cut through this metal. It was binding up and moving around and just really wasn't cutting it. So I moved to my electric die grinder, very effective. However, this burr caught into the piece a couple of times where it basically ripped it away, and I did a little bit of damage to this thing. It's making some weird noises when it gets to kind of the full, as it slows down from full speed. So maybe a bearing, maybe a bushing's a little bit out, but it still works. So I'm not going to worry about it too much right now. I just had to take it a little bit easy when I was cutting through this metal to make sure it didn't bind up again. And it bound up maybe 2 or 3 more times. So I did some work off camera. I picked up some steel. This is 1 by 1/8 inch. And I got it cut to the length that I need to separate the bed mounts, the driver's side and the passenger side. I then had some other 1 by 1 steel that was a bit longer, which I've clamped to the table underneath and squared the top to the bottom. This way I have a flat surface because my table is just not wide enough, and will allow me to make sure that everything's centered. I also drew some center lines that are halfway through so that I can make sure that this is square to this tubing. And I did that again on the other side over here, so everything's square. I then just measured the ends of the bed mounts on both sides of the tubing. They're pretty close. The distance I needed was 41.5 inches. It's probably off by maybe a 32 of an inch, but the fact that I have oval holes, if it is slightly off, that's not going to be a problem. I'll still be able to square off the bed to the frame. So what I'm going to do next is, now that everything's mounted and centered, I'm going to give it some tacks in the corners, and then I can get it fitted onto the frame to make sure it's in the spot that I want. So I have the frame mounts loosely positioned on the old frame mounts, and I found a bit of an issue. And you can see below here, there's quite a gap. I tried hammering down this piece, it's not budging. And when I take the level, it's off about 0.2 degrees, which is similar to this gap. And actually this part needs to come down about that much. The other side is angled as well, a little bit, but not as bad. So what I'm now thinking is that since kind of here forward is where it's hitting, I'm thinking about just cutting this part off. Well, after 2 hours of measuring and remeasuring, shifting, moving, and remeasuring again, I finally got the front bed mounts with the temporary cross member in place. It is level both this way and as well as front to back. I then made sure that my center mark lines up with the laser level, which also lines up with the center mark in that front cross member there. Did some measurements from a triangle in a couple of places to make sure that center is the right center, and then made some measurements from here back to this cross member to make sure everything is square and where it should be. If anything, this may want to shift like honestly like a 64th or a 32nd, so it's not that big of a deal, especially since the holes are oval, so I will still have a lot of room to move the bed, and there's enough material too if I need to grind out the hole a little bit more. I can do that to make sure the bed sits square. The main thing is that this bar is square to these frame rails because that's what I'm going to be using to figure out my points for the rear axle and the frame rails. So my next step is to weld this to the frame table below it with some scrap steel that I have. And once I've done that, I'll look to figure out how I can cut away the rest of the frame. So I welded on a couple of braces, as you can see here, just using some scrap metal that I had. Same on the other side. Check the level across and it's still 0 degrees, which is great. Here, it's off by like 0.2 degrees, and I could tweak it maybe a little bit, maybe get it to 0.1. Ideally it'd be 0, but I think I can work around it anyway. And then the other side happens to be 0. So it's just this part that tweaked on me just a little bit. So then I took some time to look at how I'm going to cut away the old frame. And I'll show you what I'm thinking. This black line is where I want to, anything forward I want to keep, anything back I want to remove. And this square tubing is actually laid into the original frame, and I've welded it all the way across. So the way I'm thinking about cutting it is drew a line because I'll grind it back because I'm not that good with a plasma cutter and I don't want to go cut away too much. But my plan is to cut along here and then maybe up to here and then again down again. And let me just turn around. And you can kind of see the line there. That's going to go all the way across and back up. So effectively is I'm going to remove this section, almost like a window, and then that'll allow me to clean up, grind back, give me a good spot to lay in the new frame, and at the bottom where it's welded, I'll be able to cut that away afterwards. But before I even get there, I want to move into the last cross member and where it comes up. And here's going to be a little bit tricky just because of how close it is. I'm thinking about cutting this here. That way I can take this whole section that goes all the way across off. So by cutting this weld I'm gonna try to get in there. If not, I may just need to start kind of cutting and hacking it away. But ideally is if I could get this, because there's a weld here, but not underneath. And then over here there is a weld down in here that I won't be able to reach, but I can reach this side and that side, and similarly cut open a section. Then I can get the plasma torch in and cut from the inside out. Then that piece will be off. This piece here will be off. And lastly, it's connected up here. Here we go. So weld, and then on that side. And I don't think I ever welded underneath. So doing that on here, as well as on the driver's side, then that allowed me to remove this whole piece and give me more access to the frame rail that kicks up here. All right, I got the cross member off. It did not go according to plan. As you can see here, some of the pieces are still around, namely here and here where it goes up. I did cut a piece out thinking I could get the torch in, couldn't quite do it. Tried even getting the angle grinder in and wasn't feeling comfortable with that. So I decided to get the plasma cutter and cut a little bit higher up. Then use the breaker bar to be able to get it in a little bit, and the angle grinder a bit, because some of the slag, just because of the angle, had to go in. It wasn't cutting completely through, and I needed the angle grinder to cut off some of the slag. And then where it was really thin, the breaker bar was able to kind of break it free. Okay, I might as well stop and let you know what I'm actually up to. So I've cut off the back where it comes up, and on both sides. This piece I had a little bit of trouble getting to, but I'm almost have that away. But I decided to just cut away this section here. And my plan, my theory is, since I'm welded along the top, you can see over here, similarly on the bottom, it's not quite straight underneath. My goal is to get this smooth and then take the plasma cutter and cut in, so there's still maybe like 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches max. Wouldn't need to go more than 2 inches anyways, but just enough that I'm actually cutting away the weld underneath. So if I come in, cut, come across, and by grinding back here, I should be able to take this piece of the square tubing that I had laid in here. And what would remain is still a little bit of a lip of the original frame. Now there are some spots like over here, which on the outside is welded a little bit deeper, so I'm probably gonna have to just cut out a bit of a window that I can weld up after. Anyway, so that's what I'm working at. It's a lot of grinding. It's tons of a mess. You can see all the grinding dust that's down here. So I knew this was going to be a messy, dirty job. I was not looking forward to it. But if I want to do what I want to do, I got to get it done. So I'll probably take it in steps, take some breaks, come back, keep at it. But once I'm done this messy part, again, hopefully my theory works and I can actually be able to remove the old frame completely with leaving the original stock frame on the outside. So what's that saying? When life gives you lemons, make lemonade? Well, that's what I'm gonna have to do, because overnight I was trying to figure out how I'm gonna remove the rest of the 3x3 1/4-inch square tubing out, and I thought I had a plan, and I realized we're still connected here, and my plan was that I would start to cut along, not the whole way, cut along and then weld on a brace. So if I actually move over here, I started cutting here, so cut along there so it would be through, weld on a brace, then finish cutting. That way the outside, which is the original frame, would still be intact, but the inside, which is the square tubing, would be able to come off, and I'd have to do it on the bottom as well as this outside. And in doing that, I wanted to make sure that the rest of this is all square, because I was gonna have to cut some areas away, like here where it's welded up between the old frame and the new frame, and there's some parts on the bottom as well. And over here where I was grinding the old weld, I actually was planning on kind of taking a haircut. That way it would break the weld. Same on the inside, it's probably welded about this point. So if I cut across, I think I was measuring 1.5 inches from the inner corner along here, then that would break the weld that's underneath. In doing so, I want to make sure everything was as rigid as possible. I was going to put another brace here, and over here I felt like this brace was not tacked that well. It's just barely tacked, and I wanted to tack it more. I started welding it, and with the heat, and I guess there was some pressure, this frame kicked back to the center of the truck. Looks like more than 1/4 inch there. So, and the whole reason I was going down this route is because I had located the rear cab mounts on both sides. I rebuilt them, spent a lot of weekends building a jig that came off of the cab and put these in the right position, and they're all new. The front ones I've done as well, you can see over there. And I was trying to maintain that. I just wasn't thinking, enough steps forward that I'd be cutting away. But now that this has shifted, I do have the jig, although one piece came off, so I'd have to reposition the jig. I could probably put it back on. I'd actually have to take off the transmission because that'd be in the way. And I think it's going to be a lot more work than it needs to be. And here's the lemonade. Instead of doing all this work on like cutting away and more cuts, I think I'm just going to cut it off here. So what I begin doing is getting some measurements. Now this has kicked inwards a little bit, but I did draw and found a center line, took a level, and did the center line over on that 401 as well, and did a level across. And while this won't be perfect, I know that this one will be off a little bit. Knowing that it's close could give me the right position. Secondly, I took the height here to the frame table. That's about 11 and 17/32 at this front point. So I know the height. I know that this will be square to that one so I could actually put a bar in between afterwards to put in the right position. So I'll have the height, I'll have an idea with the laser, how far in and out. The new frame will be here, so it's going to be against the new frame. And knowing that it is going to be square to this one, then I should be fine. So now the question is, what do I do with this tube and that mount? And my thought is I'm going to reinforce the mount to the frame table. Like, I'm going to overdo it so much, cut away the weld, and so that it's basically in position, hovering there. The only challenge, which I'll show you on the other one, it's the same on both of them, is that I did do a plug weld, which you could see over here, and I'll have to drill that out or cut it out some way. So it's just a little bit more work than if I had to just cut away some of the welds on the outside. So on this side, because I'm going to be removing all of this, I can do this on the bench or use the drill press to drill it out. So I'm not going to worry about it on this side, but on the other side, I think that's the next step I'm going to do, is drill out the plug welds. And then once those are drilled out, I will jig it up using scrap steel, including this piece here, which is now completely loose, and just reinforce it so it doesn't move. And then I could go around and cut away the welds. That way the other mount will be free. And instead of doing all this mess here, I'll be able to just cut away the tubing on the other side. So it's just going to be 4 cuts rather than a few hundred here. Okay, so I drilled out the plug welds. I ended up using a 3/4 inch hole saw, mainly because I wanted to make sure that I actually got the weld. I did not want to have to fight with the weld when I'm taking off the old frame rail. And I went as far as not only cutting through the mount plate, but also the old frame. Next step is I'm going to reinforce this so it's attached to the frame table. And then I have a couple of tack welds to cut here. I think 1 or 2 in the back. And then I have this long bead, but I'm not going to touch any of the other welding until I have this secured to the frame table, so that when I cut it away, it won't move, and then I'll be able to take away this whole piece of frame. Okay, so now everything is all braced up. It's not pretty, it's just tack welding, angle iron to it. I decided to make basically a cross brace, which it's actually welded together at the bottom part, top, to go back so that way it won't tilt, and then 2 on each side. This one actually goes up to the bracing I put for the bed mount, which actually stabilizes this a bit because the bed mount was moving in and out a little bit. It was always centering back to where it needs to be, but this way it actually gives it a bit more rigidity. So I then went ahead, cut away the weld. So I had a full weld here. Took my time, so I'm pretty sure I got most of it off. If there's just a little bit hanging on, it should break free without a problem. And then there was a couple of tack welds on the back that are broken free, and then tack welds that were on this side over here. I'm going to cut along here first because this mount I'm going to leave on. I'll take it off the frame on the table or on the bench. That way I could use a drill press to drill out the plug welds, and then I can use a vise or some clamps to hold it in place while I cut away the weld. I'll cut that off. I've already started to mark it up. You can see the white lines. I used a laser level just to make sure it's all straight, so I'm going to cut it at that white line, have it marked on the other side, and then underneath I'll do a rough cut, and with everything I'm going to grind it back to the black line, the first one there. Now that I have cut off the frame, my next step is to clean up the mounting surface. I used the plasma cutter. It's not the cleanest, it's not bad, but I also left a little bit of material so that I could slowly grind it back to the spot that I want. What I've done here is I set up the laser level. I had previously marked lines, there's actually 3 of them on both sides that were square to each other before, so if I lose one reference I still have 2 more to go back on, and it'll also help me when I try to triangulate the new frame. And so with the laser level aligned to the closest line to the cut, I have a line down here and also in front of here, so I'll be able to grind back the top and the side that's closest to the camera on both ends. Then I'll flip it around, hit the laser the other way, and then I'll be able to get this side that's now the furthest away from the camera. Now with the frame prepped, I'm going to end things off here, and in the next episode, I will be installing those new frame rails, so please come back for that one. Also, please leave a comment. I want to improve on these videos, so any feedback would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching.